We would like to dedicate this episode to a very special longtime listener.
Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of The Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario, and online experiences to anyone in this mortal realm. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and it's my privilege to introduce Brittney Bos, your host for this special episode.
What is your deepest, darkest fear? The most terrifying scenario imaginable. A nightmare of epic proportions. A situation that fills you with profound dread. An idea that tingles your spine, sends shivers throughout your body. An event that terrifies you so completely you don't even want to consider it. Maybe it's heights, or spiders, or extreme weather. Maybe it's something more mundane, but equally terrifying, like getting on stage and speaking in front of a crowd. Or perhaps it's the subject of our podcast, the paranormal. But what if you're afraid of something intended to spread joy and laughter? What if your imagination is sent into a terrifyingly feverish state just thinking about that music, that cackle, those antics? What if you think about them and just freeze in abject terror? Some nightmarish memory bubbling to the surface. A carnival? A birthday party? A horror movie? A ghastly face. Yes. We are talking about the fear of clowns. It even has a name, Coulrophobia. Like many fears, there is always a range of affliction. Some people are mildly irked by the sight of them and try to avoid them when they can. But others are so terrified, even a photo can cause feelings of sheer panic. But why clowns? What is it about them that has led to an entire phobia, and a common one at that, being researched and named? Why are so many people terrified of these supposedly joyful characters intended to spread happiness and amusement? And how has an entire pop cultural phenomenon centered around creepy clowns been created and nurtured, surviving well into the 21st century? In this episode, we'll dive into the world of creepy clowns. We'll explore the psychology behind coulrophobia, chase their oversized shoes through the funhouse of history and pop culture, and we'll uncover how these painted performers tap into some of our deepest, most primal fears. And of course, we'll share some truly disturbing tales of clown encounters that blur the line between comedy and terror. But before we get to that, I'll pass it over to our regular host, Jim, with a special message.
Thanks, Brittney. This episode is already so unsettling, and I love it. Before we get back to our creepy clown encounters, I want to share some exciting news. Our Alone in the Dark experience is returning to Ottawa's Billings Estate National Historic Site starting this weekend. We visited the site recently, and I have to say, it felt charged. It was like the building knew we were coming back and was just waiting for us. One of the most intense moments was an Estes Method session in the attic, which delivered so many eerily specific responses. Multiple voices also seemed to be joining the conversation, and it kind of felt like the whole family was up there, eager to speak with us. It was eerie, powerful, and unforgettable. This is one of our most unique paranormal adventures, and right now is the perfect time to join us. Until the end of May, you can save 20% on tickets for Alone in the Dark at the Billings Estate, as well as our Hidden Kingston, Hidden Ottawa, and Hidden Toronto tours. And, fun fact, Hidden Toronto features a wild story about brawling clowns. So, if you enjoyed today's episode, you need to go on that tour. Just visit hauntedwalk.com for all the details. And remember, as a Haunted Talks listener, you can save 15% on any of your ghost tour tickets by using the promo code HauntedTalks, all one word, at checkout. As you start making your plans for the summer, I'd like to invite you to join us for a night of spine-tingling ghost stories and paranormal adventure. In Kingston, Ottawa, or Toronto, there are so many unique experiences for you to choose from. And a little secret, just for you, tickets for our Alone in the Dark experience at Toronto's Elgin and Winter Garden Theatres in July and August are now on sale at hauntedwalk.com. We haven't announced them publicly yet, but they always go really fast. It's an incredible location to explore completely on our own. If you're hoping to join us, now is the time to get your spot. Again, it's hauntedwalk.com for information on all of our experiences. If you're enjoying the podcast, be sure to follow, rate, and review Haunted Talks wherever you listen. And please, tell your spooky friends there's always room around our seance table. We'd also love to connect with you on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky, all at Haunted Walk.
How prevalent is the fear of clowns? According to psychological data, only 2% of the population tend to fall into the phobia category. That shapes up to a common, over 1%, but rather minimal phobia. Not so scary, right? Well, other surveys have asked the question a bit differently and tried to gauge the numbers of people who are scared, but maybe not terrified. It turns out that at least 40 to 50% of people across most surveys are at least somewhat scared of clowns. That's higher than the paranormal. That's higher than aliens. And it's right on par with things like heights and crowds. Suddenly those numbers are a bit scarier. The first thing that struck me about this topic, perhaps unsurprisingly, was its history. How did we in 2025 get to a place where so many people, about half the population, admit to having some fear of clowns? You may be surprised to learn, as I was, that its background is deeper than we might expect. It's usually impossible to trace these kinds of phenomenon back to a single origin, and that's certainly the case here. Still, over the years, scattered anecdotes have left a trail of breadcrumbs that help us understand how clowns came to hold such a strange grip on the public imagination. Creepy clowns even make an appearance in ancient history. It seems like these perpetually mischievous characters are found in many cultures around the world for millennia. There's the pygmy clowns of the Egyptian pharaohs, apparently a predecessor of the medieval court jester, who liked to perform tricks and funny pranks. They're even depicted in hieroglyphs showing the everyday lives of Egyptian courtiers. Ancient Rome had a similar figure, often called the stupidus, who had carte blanche to poke fun at anyone in Rome, even the emperor and his family. Sounds a lot like the ancient Chinese court clowns, who were the only ones permitted to make fun of that fanciful idea called the Great Wall of China, an offense that was normally punishable by death. Unfortunately, very few visual sources survive that provide any insight into what these court clowns actually looked like. We don't know if they wore the characteristic makeup or flamboyant costumes that we've come to recognize. We know that they must have looked different from everyday people, but their most distinguishing feature was how they acted. Across these examples, it's clear that ancient clowns didn't have to follow the same rules as everyone else. They could dress and act strangely. They could pull pranks. They could tell jokes, and even make fun of the supreme leaders of the day. And that's probably where some of the unsettling feelings began. Think about it. You're living in a society with strict expectations about how to behave. Then a funny-looking character comes out of nowhere and completely flouts those rules, and everyone laughs about it. Doesn't sound too scary. Certainly not Pennywise parading around town luring children to their deaths. But it's definitely unsettling. Let's fast forward to more modern clowns and think about how they made the jump from harmless pranksters to feared menaces. The shift began in the medieval period in Europe and the infamous court jester. You've probably seen them countless times in popular culture. A person dressed in a silly, colorful costume, often with pointed shoes and a ridiculous hat with jingle bells. We usually see them performing tricks, singing songs, and playing music, or engaging in harmless jokes. But this is a very sanitized interpretation of court jesters. In reality, jesters pushed boundaries and even ventured into the macabre. Especially during times of plague or famine, jesters acted out scenes of death and human suffering. They frequently sang songs and comprised melodies about the harsh realities of medieval life. Far from the fumbling funny man, court jesters often broadcast bad news for the court. With their unsettling mix of dark content and humorous entertainment, jesters pushed people to reflect on tough subjects like mortality and death. But let's fast forward once more, this time to the Victorian period. Lovers of history and the paranormal will not be surprised to learn that jesters and clowns gained their more terrifying gloss during this era. And who better to mark this growing trend than Edgar Allan Poe himself? Poe explored the jester figure a few times in his stories, but the most notable is a short story entirely dedicated to a court jokester called Hop Frog. The story, which is set among kings and courts, was published in 1849 and had elements of Poe's own autobiography. In the story, the main figure, Hop Frog, is a court jester who was stolen from his home and presented to the king as a gift. Hop Frog is funny and entertaining, prone to pulling pranks and telling jokes, but he's not threatening to the people around him. He is described as having dwarfism and other unnamed physical ailments, so the courtiers find his little pranks to be harmless. One day, the king and his cabinet go too far, openly mocking and abusing Hop Frog and his friend Trippetta. It's the last straw. As with many of Poe's protagonists, Hop Frog chooses the long and deliberate road to revenge. He approaches the king and his cabinet with a proposal for an upcoming ball. Why not play a prank on the rest of the court? Hop Frog suggests they arrive in terrifying, beastly costumes made from tar and covered in flax, entering the hall in chains for added dramatic effect. Once inside, the doors can be shut and locked. Imagine the panic, Hop Frog teases, the terrified faces of the guests, the rising chaos. How fun it will be! The brutal king loves the idea and sets to arranging the ball. On the night of the celebration, the chained group of beasts arrives, just as planned. Hop Frog seizes his moment. While the king and his cabinet revel in the fear they are causing, he quietly fastens their chains to a pulley hidden above. With a sudden heave, Hop Frog hauls them into the air, lifting them high above the crowd. The audience quickly realizes that the whole thing was a prank, and they begin to laugh. The beasts are upset, realizing that they have been tricked. The king and his cabinet are hopelessly entangled in the chains, covered in tar, with the doors locked and their identities concealed. Hop Frog then steps up, torch in hand, looks them in the eye, and lights the beastly mask on fire. The story concludes with the defiant line, "I am simply Hop Frog the jester, and this is my last jest." That sounds a lot more like the creepy clowns we're afraid of, doesn't it? Although the details are a bit different in Poe's version, the storyline is very familiar to us. A supposedly jokey, unthreatening character is poking fun, telling jokes, playing pranks, until things turn dark and descend into mayhem and murder. But Hop Frog is still a jester, a character right out of medieval courts of Europe, not our contemporary world. Where do modern creepy clowns, the recognizable figure with painted face and fancy costume, come from? It's the Victorians again. Many credit Joseph Grimaldi as the first modern clown, with the characteristic makeup, costume, and persona we now recognize in 2025. Grimaldi was a British performer who graced the stages of London in the early 19th century. People were moving to the city in droves, and the theater scene was exploding, eventually offering acts for all social classes. Comedy and entertainment was a relatively new genre that was different than the seriousness and stuffiness of a stage play. Joseph Grimaldi soon rose to fame with its comedic skits aimed at all sectors of London society. He was popular with everyone, from the lowest factory worker all the way up to the factory owner, a truly remarkable feat attesting to his popularity. His bright costume and sunny personality on stage lit up the darkest corners of Britain's Industrial Revolution. But his entertainment came at a deep personal price. Grimaldi had suffered terrible trauma during his childhood, including a tyrannical father and abject poverty. Close family members met tragic ends, and his body was broken by the feats he performed during his acts. Despite being one of the most famous performers of his time and always in high demand, Grimaldi was nearly bankrupt and died in extreme poverty. The whole affair was a sad tragedy. A man who dedicated his life to making others laugh silently suffered behind closed doors. Joseph Grimaldi's story didn't end with his final bow. His fame was cemented and darkened by none other than Charles Dickens, who edited Grimaldi's memoirs and added a heavy dose of sorrow. Macabre Victorians, always fascinated by a horror story, were eager to learn more about the famous Grimaldi and flocked to bookstores in 1838. While Dickens didn't invent details outright, he certainly leaned into the most pitiful aspects of Grimaldi's life. He was a man who died making people happy, Dickens implied. It was a dark transformation of Grimaldi's public, sunny persona that so many knew and loved. Grimaldi's fame as a clown continued. He's credited as the first modern clown performer. But his dark side also lived on. In fact, every comedic clown was now forever linked to a much darker underbelly. Many credit Dickens' edited volume as the invention of the creepy clown persona, and I think you can see why. This didn't come out of nowhere. There were plenty of court jesters with shady characters already out there. But clowns began appearing more and more frequently at Victorian entertainments, like fairs and circuses, and eventually vaudeville. They only grew in popularity after Dickens's time. However, these circus and entertainment skits probably aren't what you're thinking. Clowns played a very different role in the 19th century. They were crass, prone to swearing, veered into sexual innuendo, and liked to tell jokes that pushed the boundaries of respectability. Clowns allowed people, especially working class folks, to openly laugh at societal norms and all those tight-laced upper classes. Because they were performing, usually in full makeup and costume, the clowns were given that ancient carte blanche to anonymously act however they wanted, often to the surprise of more conservative folks in the crowd. The clown performances were so outrageous, they were even banned in some places. But as circuses became more popular and attracted a wider audience, they were forced to clean up their act, at least enough to become palatable to the masses. Clowns remained edgy, but slowly transformed to the characters we know today. The acts shed their dirty and dark elements and became much less shocking and far more palatable to children. By the height of the circus show, around the turn of the century, the clown's target audience was anyone and everyone. Regardless of age, class, or background, they provided comic relief with jokes and pranks that broke up the more serious acts of bravery and physical feats. The transition didn't stop there. Gradually, clowns became more and more associated with children. The curious thing, as children, even today, tend to be the most fearful of clowns. Their strange makeup and flamboyant costumes solicit curiosity from children, and often fear. Some clowns even play up that fear and make terrified and crying children part of their act, usually to roars of laughter from the audience. Before you judge too harshly, consider if you've ever laughed at the shocked faces of kids as they gaze up at Santa Claus right before bursting into ear-piercing cries, and that photo is captured forever. Most of us are probably guilty of finding some humor in similar situations. But this relationship between clowns and children, and cashing in on their abject terror, is likely the highest contributing factor in cases of coulrophobia. Many sufferers of the phobia report being terrified by a clown at a young age, while their caregivers stood by and laughed. You can see how the creepy clown character enters the picture, and suddenly, starting in the mid-20th century, we have a group of adults now terrified of clowns, and a new generation of popular entertainers are about to step up and make that fear even worse. Like Dickens and Poe before him, Stephen King is not responsible for creating the creepy clown through his book and later movie It. But he certainly fed those existing phobias. Foundational horror movies in the 1970s and 1980s had already discovered that the creepy clown was an effective jump scare, but It was the coup de grace. The infamous horror novel was published in 1986 to great acclaim. It's still one of King's most notable and best-selling novels, which is saying a lot for such a famous author. The novel was adapted to a movie in 1990, where Tim Curry's portrayal of Pennywise forever entered our collective nightmares. It was revived in 2017 and 2019, injecting new shots of fear into yet another generation of unsuspecting horrorgoers. The clown in It, both the novel and movies, is a shape-shifting creature that periodically descends on a small town in Maine. It intends to destroy the community by murdering children, and the occasional adult who gets in the way. As with other creepy clowns from the previous century, Pennywise seems like a fairly ordinary, cheerful character, with the characteristic makeup and costume. But it doesn't take long for him to manipulate unsuspecting children to feed his need for human blood. For people who've read the novel, the passages where Pennywise is narrator, gruesomely outlining his horrific acts, are some of the most unsettling chapters in King's work. But a murderous clown that preys on unsuspecting young people, unfortunately, isn't confined to the pages of King's infamous novel. In fact, a killer clown makes uncomfortably frequent appearances in true crime. The most famous is undoubtedly John Wayne Gacy, an American serial killer who preyed on young men in the 1960s and 1970s, and frequently performed as a clown named Bobo. The combination of his day job, where he played a jolly comedic figure, and the murders, where he tortured and dismembered bodies, added a new level of horror to this creepy clown stereotype. Popular media was certain to play up that unsettling juxtaposition. Here was a man living out our greatest fears, a person with an abhorrent habit of torture and murder, living in our midst as a clown. What was worse, Gacy wasn't alone. Marlene Warren was enjoying a quiet morning at home with her son in May 1990. The two had sat down for breakfast and were chatting during the meal when a knock came at the door. Although Marlene wasn't expecting anyone, she went to the door anyways, probably confident her neighborhood was safe, and she had no reason to be afraid. Her son Joe saw his mother open the door to a strange sight. A clown in full costume and makeup. The figure stood there, holding a bouquet of flowers and 2 balloons. Marlene was stunned, but also delighted. She began to thank the visitor, reaching out for the gifts. That's when the clown pulled out a gun and shot her at point-blank range before fleeing the scene. Marlene died from her injuries, and Joe was haunted by the image of his mother falling to the floor, shot by a clown. The crime went unsolved for over 25 years, until a suspect was finally arrested, charged, and pled guilty. It was Marlene's ex-husband's new wife. Before the killer's true identity was known, people all over the United States and even the world were terrified that they too might open their door and find a murderous clown on their doorstep. This was the same year as the infamous movie It, and popular culture was abuzz with this creepy clown character. Situation just added to the growing frenzy. But hold on. All sorts of people commit murder and do terrible things, and as a society, we don't have an overwhelming fear of them and everyone who does similar work. So why does the sight of clowns suddenly prompt an emotional response that sends people fleeing in terror? According to some rather deep psychological studies in the phenomenon, it appears to be a combination of a clown's unpredictable quirks, the thing that usually makes them funny, and its hidden identity, which is masked under layers of makeup and weird costumes. Who are they? And what will they do next? It's one of our most basic human fears. I want to close our episode today with the creepiest part. A couple of weeks ago, in preparation for this episode, the Haunted Walk's Facebook page posted a question to followers. Who is afraid of clowns, and why? First, a shout out to everyone who replied and shared some of their deepest fears with us. I enjoyed reading your stories and reasoning, and they helped me assemble some of the creepy content for this episode. But I was struck by how many people denied being afraid of clowns, or simply said it wasn't an issue for them. I confess, I generally fall into that category myself, but there's a collection of incidents that I researched that changed my mind. I might begin counting myself with the somewhat fearful crowd from now on. I'm wondering if some of you might even revise your answers after hearing about these creepy clown incidents. In 2013, residents of Northampton, England, began reporting a rash of creepy clowns spotted around town. They looked like the typical Pennywise, with white costumes and unsettling painted faces. The clowns didn't do anything, though. They just turned up in random places, stood on street corners, and gazed into shop windows. It turned out that the spectacle was started by some local filmmakers who wanted to drive engagement on their social media pages. Although no harm was done, people, especially children, were a bit unsettled. Over the next 2 years, a similar story repeated itself in places like Wasco, California, Chicago, Illinois, Staten Island, New York, all with the similar aim of promoting various film productions. The stories stayed local, but together, they provided the dry tinder for a spark that was about to ignite. That came in August 2016 in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Concerned community members were reporting that people dressed as clowns were appearing around the city, attempting to lure children into cars or into the woods with the promise of candy or other gifts. Although no proof of those claims was ever found, it coincided with yet another one of those movie promotions. A creepy clown posing in downtown Green Bay, hoping to hype an upcoming low-budget film. By all accounts, this clown wasn't trying to lure anybody. Those were completely separate incidents. But it didn't matter. The promotional photos were posted on a Facebook page that was trying to bring attention to the candy-luring case, and the fire was officially set. Social media absolutely exploded at a rate never seen before. It was 2016, just as the viral crazes were entering prime time. Random clowns were being spotted all over, from Canada, Australia, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Philippines, and elsewhere. The creepy photos and videos got the most likes, propelling their uploaders to instant internet fame. As with all wild crazes, hoaxers quickly entered the mix and tried to make the next best post, one after another after another. As the hoaxes piled up and spread, some genuinely evil people used the event to cover their sinister crimes. It's likely that people with bad intentions use the creepy clown craze to cover things like assaults, murders, robberies, harassment, and other crimes. One of the most prominent examples was in Florida, where an entire family was killed by some clowns who decided to use the craze to cover up what they had done. Like every viral craze, even those prior to the internet, hysteria hit a fever pitch and people were genuinely terrified of the creepy clowns that seemed to be lurking around every corner. The intentions of the individual clowns were as mysterious as their appearance. People online speculated that the clowns were part of a secret cult intent on destroying human society. Others were convinced that the clowns were like Pennywise, some form of alien being here to satisfy its need for human blood before returning to its slumber. Others were certain it was a band of criminals, perhaps a secret ring of gang members using the clown persona to hide their misdeeds. Whatever theory they adopted, officials all over the world were worried. What were these clowns? What were they doing? What was their endgame? And how on earth could they be stopped? The public appearance of clowns was famously banned in some Australian jurisdictions. People were threatened with arrest. In other places, costumes were pulled off shelves for Halloween, and police publicly cautioned against dressing as a clown for any reason. Some towns and cities canceled Halloween trick-or-treating altogether in October of 2016, worried that the creepy clowns might use the opportunity to poison the community. There was even talk of a suspected clown purge, where all of the clowns would come out and attack, enacting their endgame on the vulnerable public. Countless news outlets reported on the events, adding to the confusion and speculation, fueling the hysteria, and ultimately stoking the fear. For people who are already scared of clowns, this was nightmare fuel. Suddenly coming across your worst fear as you drove to work or walked to the grocery store? For those who had never feared clowns before, the incidents planted a seed of doubt. Something that once seemed harmless and joyful suddenly felt unpredictable and threatening. So what was up with all these clowns around the world? This is the part that gives me pause and should cause a tinge of fear in you too. We simply don't know. Some people have openly admitted to joining in on the fun, getting a kick out of making people scream simply by dressing up in a costume and standing on a street corner. Others did use the guise to commit crimes, but noted it was just a convenient cover, long after the clown craze was already underway. Some used it for internet clout, and others successfully promoted their social media and film projects. But none of that fully explains the scale of what happened. There were a lot of clowns in the fall of 2016. Yet after Halloween that year, they just vanished. A few more were spotted here and there, but like any hysteria, it stopped as abruptly as it started. It's one of those incidents that leaves us with far more questions than answers. The whole thing has made me wonder if the coulrophobia people have it right after all, and we should all be avoiding these characters at all costs. Maybe the fear isn't irrational. Maybe the warnings in our pop culture aren't exaggerations. After today's episode, I'll let you decide.
thank you so much for joining us. And special thanks to Brittney Bos for delivering an episode which I know has disturbed many of you. To get your tickets for Alone in the Dark at the Billings Estate in Ottawa, or Hidden Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, 20% off until the end of May, or to be one of the first to get your spot for Alone in the Dark at Toronto's Elgin and Winter Garden Theatres, please visit our website at hauntedwalk.com. Also, keep an eye out for us on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky, all at Haunted Walk. As always, a special thanks to our Haunted Talks team, including Michelle Dennis, our outstanding audio editor. Until we meet again, keep an eye on those clowns, and sweet dreams.